What happens? What's it all about? Goliath. That's his name, son. And if I could run off like you, I'd be streaking up that mountainside this very minute, headed for home as fast as I could go. You bet I would. He's a giant. Looks about a mile high, although Abner, he's our CO, he says he's not quite 10 feet tall. But just the same, it's the biggest 10 feet I've ever seen. And he wears a huge bronze helmet that makes him look about twice as tall. The soldier stopped and wiped the sweat from his brow as the heat of the fearful memory triggered every defense mechanism in his physiological chemistry. Now listen, young fellow. He stopped to lick his dry lips. You listen good. You could use that spear of his as a weaver's beam. And the iron head alone weighs 15 pounds. I mean, just think of it, boy. 15 pounds of iron in one spearhead. Well, we don't have that much iron in our whole army. And think of what a beautiful plow tip that would make. We could use that back at home, you see. The way he waves it in the air is enough to scare the living daylights out of a fellow. Every morning he comes out all wrapped up in his chain mail. It weighs, well, about as much as you do. Every morning the sun glints off all his armor. It's enough to blind a person. And then he just stands there on that little bit of bare ground by the bank of the brook and bellows out a challenge to us. Tells us that he'll fight anyone we care to put up. And boy, he jeers and taunts us till we all feel sick. Some days he comes out and does it again in the evening. And all I can say is, this is one lousy, stinking war. So it was a very thoughtful young David who went home that evening. Now last time we looked at a quotation from Patriarchs and Prophets, page 644, at the bottom and up to the top of the next page, where Ellen White talks about how it was by his father's direction, by Jesse's direction, that David had been sent to carry a message and a gift to his older brothers and learn if they were still in safety and health. But unknown to Jesse, the youthful shepherd had been entrusted with a higher mission. The armies of Israel were in peril, and David had been directed by an angel to save his people. God has sent David on a special mission. And in thinking about this, several things stood out to me. First of all, God is meeting David where he is, in the world that he's living in, and the way that he has been thinking about things. And he knows that David is going to respond. David is going to take his own experiences and try to make them part of this. But it's for the purpose of saving God's plan, his covenant with his people. And Saul, in all his foolishness, has gone out there and confronted the Philistines knowing that God is not with him, knowing that he's on his own, with really no weapons. I mean, 2 swords in the whole army at this point. I know it'll be different after this battle, but right at this point, that's all they've got. He has put himself in a terrible position because if he retreats, he'll be looked down on by the Israelites who will lose confidence in his leadership. And if he presses forward and actually engages the Philistines in battle, he's going to lose for sure. God is not with him. He is going to lose. And think of what that's going to mean to God's people. God said, I won't let that happen. David, I've chosen you already to be the next king. I want you to go and save the people. I will be with you. So I believe that there was more than one time that David visited the camp, just from the way in which it's described in Scripture. I get the feeling that perhaps he had been there before and that his brothers were especially upset that he was showing up again. They would think, you know, you're just trying to shirk your work back home. But you can imagine when Jesse said, here, David, it's time to take some more food to the men. Maybe it was a week later, maybe at the most 2 weeks. But whatever, Father is sending some more food to the army. Sure, Dad. Last time I saw, they were having a pretty rough time. He doesn't mention, really, they were just sitting there doing nothing, just watching the Goliath show. But then he said, don't you think I'd better leave in the morning, though? It's getting a little late in the day now, and the new bread should be baked by this evening. I'll get up early and push off first thing in the morning. Well, first thing was right. He got there at daybreak in time to get a front row seat to the Goliath show. As the giant stood there bawling out his taunts, all the young man and David just leapt to the challenge. The great lumbering two-legged bear was just there for the taking. Say, what do you think it would be worth to kill that big blowhard? Suppose somebody did kill him. The soldier standing next to David just stared at him. But he knew he actually heard what the kid said the first time. Now listen, Buster, if anybody killed Goliath, he'd get to marry the king's daughter. That's what he'd get. And about $1 million too, I reckon. And his whole family would get their taxes refunded for life. I'd say he'd have just about anything he'd like. David jumped to his feet. They'd all been squatting down behind some rocks at the top of the slope to see the show. David waved a hand in Goliath's direction. Well, okay then, I'll go kill him. 2 or 3 men nearby laughed grimly. The sort of miserable laugh you might hear at a baseball game where there are 2 outs and 2 strikes on the batter in the bottom of the 9th, and some wise guy yells out, well, looks like the game's over. Yeah, that last pitch hasn't been thrown, but it's over. Several others glowered savagely. What sort of fool was this who would start wisecracking when Goliath was out there booming his taunting sneers? But David stood firm. There was something in his eye, even at this age, something in his intensity, which made Ben stop and take him seriously. No matter what you say, he's a game little fellow. I think he's mad as a hatter. Needs to be taken out behind the woodshed. Well, I never heard you say anything as brave as that, you big slob. Poor old Goliath. As a slight hubbub reached his ear and a ripple of movement caught his eye, he put on some extra steam. Maybe his big act had finally rattled them. Maybe they were finally going home. This was all going to be over. And just as things were heating up, who should walk up but Goliath, big brother Goliath. What are you doing here? Why aren't you back home with your smelly sheep, you little sneak? I know your cheeky, skulking ways, you little rat. So you're sneaking down here to see the fighting. Doesn't your heart just miss a beat when you hear David's answer? That tragic answer of the whipped kid, the beaten child. What have I done now? Can't I say anything? Why don't you leave me alone? What had been flashing in David's eye only 10 seconds before had become the bleak, lackluster, sidelong glance of the child whose hope is so nearly dashed. It's that same look that teachers and medical professionals see in this misery of messed up home relations far too often. David just slunk off. You can't do anything else with Goliath except kill him, of course. And you don't kill your brother unless you want to be like Cain. And David had learned long ago he didn't want to be like Cain. There were more men to talk to, and just giving Goliath the slip was far easier than getting revenge. Soon the whole camp was talking about David's exclamation. Even Saul heard about it. Saul and Abner, his chief of staff, were probably the only 2 men in this army who even looked like soldiers. The rest were really just hill farmers. But Saul and Abner were men worthy of a place of real leadership anywhere. Saul called for David. David came on the double, lithe, wiry, alert. Sir, I'm not scared. I'll go kill him. Saul smiled. Good for you, lad. But you're still a teenager. And this man has been a professional soldier ever since he grew up. You can't go and fight him. Yes, I can, sir. I'll kill him easily, sir. I tend sheep for my father, and when a lion or bear comes after one of my flock, I grab him by the beard and kill him. This Philistine is just another big animal. Sir, that big heathen has defied the armies of the living God, and if God helped me kill the lions and bears, he'll certainly protect me from this human monster. Saul was impressed. The intensity, the fire, the obvious self-discipline of all those hard-fought years out on the hills with the sheep were very convincing, and Saul was sold. Saul was, all right, if you think you can, I'm prepared to let you give it a try. Here's my armor, put that on. You're going to need every bit of help you can get. I just hope God is with you. Now, I won't take too long to describe why I think Saul let David go, why, in fact, he couldn't stop his going. But as you remember from Saul's case file, and some of you will remember about 6 years ago when I first introduced this topic and was beginning to look at stories in the Bible as case files, we looked at Saul's case file. And we saw a man that God had chosen, who chose not to listen to God any longer, and he wanted God out of his life. And from that case file, I remember the very mention of God had a very, very most compelling effect on Saul. This is the strange fear of the man who in his heart rebels against God, and yet knows that only God can help him out of the jam he's gotten himself into. What a dilemma to be in. Saul knows he can't get out of this fix, and he got himself into it. But now God is offering a way out, and if God is going to be with David, which Saul really believes is not only possible, it's probably true, maybe some of that good luck could rub off on him. So he said, we'll let you go and see what happens. So David was on his way to kill, this time, not an animal, but a man made in the image of God. Now the armor he took off right away. It might have been fun to wear it at home someday when Sergeant Eliab and Corporal Abinadab and Private Shema were all sitting around in their uniforms at home. They didn't have any armor. Wouldn't that wipe the grins off their big faces? But no, this is serious. He wasn't trying to show off to his big brother Eliab. He was going out to kill a man. And like the lion or the bear, he knew that only one of the contestants would leave this fight alive. When Goliath saw David coming, he let loose every curse and oath he had ever heard. And David knew that when a man swears and curses, it's generally true that he has run out of vocabulary. He had heard that often enough at home from his brothers. And he knew that if Goliath kept talking, he would be able to get to within firing range with his machine gun while the other fellow kept on swearing. Poor old Goliath. You ask any 250-pound, 6'3" soldier what it feels like to be under crossfire from a machine gun attack. Goliath was much bigger than that. But he wasn't going to have to face an artillery attack. No, it was just a kid. And right there, under David's flashing gaze, lumbers this huge human animal loaded down with hundreds of pounds of armor. You ever wondered, why did David take 5 stones? All he really needed was 1. After all those years of practice out there with the sheep, there was no chance he was missed. Besides, Goliath was too big to miss, like the broadside of a barn. Maybe 5 was just his lucky number. But in any case, I think this just might have been what God heard running through David's mind at that moment. God, you helped me kill bears and lions. And a man's skull can't be much thicker than a bear's, can it? But I've never seen a giant before, so you'll have to help me. Suppose the first shot hits but doesn't stop it. Then maybe I'd have time for 4 more shots at the most. Why, if I can't stop him with 5 shots and I've had it, I'm done for. So you'll have to help me because I can't do this alone. I'm going to do what I've always done before, but I can't win without you. We know what happened. It all took place in a flash. The first stone slammed into Goliath's skull, traveling 200 feet per second. There's something like 5,000 foot-pounds of energy packed into that stone, at least according to what I heard in my high school physics class. How does that compare with the punch of a slug from a Colt 45? Well, it stopped this giant. Stopped him right in his tracks. Philistines were devastated. To see a shepherd boy annihilate their awesome champion in less time than the time between 2 successive heartbeats panicked them. They threw down their weapons. They ran for home as fast as they could, not even stopping at Gath to give the news to Goliath's next of kin. Can you see the excitement and the delight of the men returning victoriously, gathering around David, shaking his hand, slapping him on the back, offering him the pick of the treasures, the food, the weapons, the spoil from the rich Philistines? What a day it had been. It had still been dark when he left home that morning, a nameless errand boy taking food to his big, strong, tough fighting brothers. Now as the sun sets, here he was, the idol of the camp, the champion of the army. David, the boy with the sheep, was gone forever. David, the man of blood, had taken his place. The shadow of Goliath would follow him for the rest of his life. The Bible doesn't specifically say this, at least in this part of the story, and we often overlook it. But something happens inside a person when we purposely choose to take the life of another human being made in God's image. There's something that gets broken that can't ever be fixed. It was never fixed for David. It's going to figure into the decisions that he makes for the rest of his life. Did God have any other plans? We mentioned in the children's story that David had 2 secret weapons. He could pray and he could sing. What if David had done what one of his descendants would do later on? We read in the book of Chronicles about King Jehoshaphat. When the nation of Judah was being invaded by foreign armies, he chose to go out with the choir. And the choir began singing praise to the Lord. And they won the battle. They didn't have to fight. Did God want David to kill Goliath himself? Did God want him to be up to his armpits in Goliath's blood? What would God have done had David pulled out his harp and started singing? I mean, that would be a story to think about. But you have to remember where David was. He was living at a time just coming out of the period of the Judges, where everyone does what they think is right in their own eyes, and they're not really thinking about God. Now, David is an exception to this, but he's got all this history. And coming out of it, he's leaning toward God, but he still doesn't realize all the possibilities. I don't know. Would God have sent hornets? You can imagine Goliath with hornets inside all that chain mail, all that armor. I mean, he's being stung by hundreds of hornets. I mean, wouldn't it have come about the same way? Could God have chased the whole Philistine army that way? I mean, we try to limit God sometimes too much, thinking we have to do it ourselves. But the battle, as David said, the battle belongs to the Lord. Next time we'll continue the story, and I've to entitle this next section Life on the Run, because literally David is going to be running for his life for the next 20 or so years. But for our closing hymn this morning, I'd like to bring a song. It had to be something he could put in his sling. Yeah, right. We're not told exactly, but it had to be something small enough that he could, still sling it. I assume it would be something like what he had used against the lions and bears. He'd used that before. But God can work through all kinds of ways, and sometimes we limit him too quickly. That's why I thought about this song here, the battle belongs to the Lord, and because I'm having trouble with it, the file working in PowerPoint, I'm going to play it from media player here, and I've got the sound on here, I think. But this is the song, Battle Belongs to the Lord. And this is the scripture that we read just a few minutes ago. Let's bow our heads for prayer. Loving Father in heaven, we thank you so much for the love that you've shown to us in so many different ways as you have recorded the experiences of people like us who've been in some very difficult situations at times. And when they trusted you, you came to their rescue. We know that you're the same today as you always were. We know that you're able to do mighty things if we trust you. Help us to turn to you and to put you in the center of our lives. As you draw us closer to yourself, you draw us closer to each other as we're continually drawn into your likeness. Work in our lives to heal what sin has destroyed and damaged and broken. Heal and restore us to your likeness, that your love can flow through us completely and fully. And we'll give you praise all through eternity, because you're the only one who really deserves the glory and the honor and the power and the praise. And we will always thank you because of Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen.